Hey guys, Josh, J, Vintage Honda Minis. I'm in East Orlando, Florida, USA. This video, we're going to talk about clutch adjustments for the manual engine, the horizontal small bore engines such as the CT70H, would be, I guess, a DAX for guys over in Europe and Japan. It comes with a 4-speed and clutch. It can come on an SL70, XL70, CL70. So we'll cover this manual clutch adjustment. This is my test bike for an engine I'm rebuilding. So we're ready to fire this over, but I'm getting it set up in the bike. So we got an 88 TB parts, jug and piston, stock head, stock stator, Mitsubishi stator, and a clutch. That's the manual clutch, like I said, on this is an H motor, CT70H. So kind of what's happening, you can either have a rebuild, you're going to put some new I recommend using Honda discs for your stock builds, just because you're going to use quality parts that are spec'd appropriately. So like if you have an engine that's not a new build, but you're getting a poor kick over, you don't feel like there's any compression, you're getting some poor shifts, some crunchiness, the first step I would always do is let's make a clutch adjustment and see if we can correct the issue. So for these engines that are the manual clutches, you have your clutch arm. We're looking at the inside behind this plate. I'll show you what the plate you got to take off, and then you have your cable that's going to pull from the handlebar and pull this arm up and actuates the mechanisms in here. So there's two adjustments we'll make. We'll make for me, I'm going to make my initial adjustment here on this nut and stud, and then you can make some finer adjustments on the cables through this that adjusts your free play on your clutch cable. Alright, so we're starting from scratch. First step's going to be, let's get this cover off. I would recommend getting yourself some JIS bits. That's Japanese Industrial Standard. All these screw heads are JIS screw bits, so Phillips heads is not a Phillips screwdrivers are not appropriate for these screws, or you'll end up stripping them out when they're torqued down, like on the case screws. This should be like a number 2 JIS. These larger heads on the engine case are JIS number 3. So we'll back those off, and then you get access to the inside of the cover where all the mechanisms are. Also take note, there's a gasket, so you want to make sure you either have one or you're putting a new one in, because you don't want moisture and stuff getting back here. This engine, I had to clean these brackets. They were salvageable, but they were really rusty. Some of this aluminum in here has some corrosion pock marks, and that's just because moisture was getting back here without a gasket over the cover. Okay. Before I do any kind of adjustments, I just wanted to make a note also is, again, this stuff is greased. I got some grease on this cam arm, grease back here on these pivot points. So over time you want to make sure you're re-greasing these parts to make sure that they have the least amount of resistance in the whole process of when you're pulling on your clutch lever. Also your cable here, make sure this is oiled, because I'm going to pull my brake lever. Because if you watch here, you want to make sure your arm moves good and resets. So there's a spring right here that is a return spring that can wear out, but most likely what's happening if you're getting a bad reset is probably just contamination on these parts. So I would start by cleaning these. This little dowel right here is the dowel that holds this arm. You have to get that little dowel out, so you can use like a really small, like jeweler's flathead, and even a very strong magnet would be a good way to pull this out, because this is a piece of steel. And once you pull that little dowel out, this cam arm can slide out, and you can service it, clean it. These screws will remove easily, and you can get in there and put some grease in there to help keep it maintained. Okay, so that would be my first step. Service this area, clean it, grease it, oil your cable, clean all that stuff, make sure your arm has very good movement and return. Alright, so now on to the actual clutch adjustment. So we'll focus on this stud here. Alright, so before we do any adjustment, make sure your engine's off, of course. You don't want to make any adjustments while the engine is running. Okay, so 10mm nut. Back that off. And we're going to use a flathead. We're going to back this out. And then we're going to make sure we got some looseness. And then what you're going to want to do is turn this adjustment stud slowly and gently until you feel the resistance once it pushes up on the actual clutch internals. So we're going to keep turning and I hit resistance, so I'm going to stop. And then you want to turn it back about 1/4 of a turn. So we'll stop there and then we can re-tighten this nut to hold it in place. So that is your adjustment that you're making inside of this case, behind this case cover. That's it. That's as simple as it is. Next adjustment we have is actually on the cable itself, and I'll show you how you're going to do that. But you can see there is some play between this cam arm. When it rotates, it's going to push into this plate, and then that plate gets pushed into the stud that will push into the actual clutch basket and that whole mechanism inside. So this cam arm needs to have some adjustment, and that will be done through the cable side of things, where there's an adjustment barrel on the cable. Alright, so there is some play, that's what you want, and then we'll make that final adjustment to the cable itself. In my example, I have an aftermarket clutch handle perch here, but this is going to be the exact same principle for a stock setup, just looks a little different. Okay, it's still mechanical, still has the similar cable with a adjustment nut in the middle of the run. Okay, so you're gonna want, when the manual, it calls for about 1/2 inch of free play before engagement. So what that means is initially they want you to have about 1/2 inch of pull, about that much pull, and then you're gonna feel the clutch starting to give you resistance. So we're gonna make that final adjustment with that in mind, giving me 1/2 inch of play and then clutch release. Okay, so when we're following our clutch line cable, here's the adjustment nut. Okay, so this nut is used to take up free play. So when we make adjustments here, we're actually shortening or lengthening the cable free play available to the clutch arm over here. All right, so depending on your situation, if you're looking at this cable and you rotate this big nut counterclockwise, you are shortening your free length, you're taking up slack. Now if you turn it clockwise, you're giving yourself more slack. So depending on your situation, that's the way you want to turn it. Okay, so in my example, I'm pulling up on my arm like I would be pulling on a cable. I got a little bit of play that is initial before it actually hits the plate and then pulls it in. Okay, so for me, like I said, I'm going to go counterclockwise and I'm going to start turning that nut on the cable. And you're going to see that arm start to rotate as see right here, you'll see it start climbing as I'm taking up slack. So this is how we're making our adjustment. So there's still some play behind that. Just a little bit of play. That's where I'm going to keep it for my initial setting. Okay? And then again, we want a good kick over. We got good kick over, so our clutch plates are grabbing, and I've got about a 1/2 inch of play before I feel the resistance on my pull handle on my handlebar for my clutch. Okay, so we're going to set it there for the initial adjustment, and then make some fine tunes based on how that transmission and clutch wants to cooperate. Alright, so we're at the stage that I'm going to do my kickover. Now this engine again is a rebuild engine, so I'm just going to take it easy. It's still just, I just fired it once just to get it warmed up and go through a heat cycle, and this will be the second time. But what we're looking for on the clutch is the ability to pull the clutch in, put it in gear, have it engage smoothly, and then you can release your clutch and go under power and leave. If it stalls, like it just grabs and stalls the motor, you don't have enough disengagement in the clutch. If you were to have your clutch handle pulled in, and for example, and then you pop it in the gear and it just wants to lurch forward and stall, well, you still have to make some counterclockwise adjustments on that cable to help the arm eat up some of the or the cable to eat up some of that free play. Reason that it's stalling is because you're not disengaging the discs enough. They're not separating, so when you shift it into gear, it's like a hard shift with no clutch disengagement. So when you first start it off, make it don't rev it up, just be very gentle with it. Ensure that your clutch is disengaging and engaging properly, and then you can go for your test ride once you're confident that you have that disengagement working appropriately. Otherwise you can put a lot of abuse into that transmission. So I'm going to go ahead and just kick this over and give it a test ride. Alright, so that ride's good for me. I'm able to go through all my gears. Everything feels nice and smooth. And then I can shift back down and go back down to neutral. So that's what you're looking for. Hopefully this is not too complicated. Hopefully I explained it well for you guys. Again, I always have some tips and trick videos coming out for you. So subscribe if you don't. I appreciate it if you do. Alright guys, thanks.